This is problem 711 from Brigham and Houston's Fundamentals of Financial Management, Concise 9th edition. And problem 711 talks about two concepts. One is yield to maturity versus yield to call, and we also are addressing the idea of current yield. The current yield, the definition of current yield, is the annual cash flow, which would be the annual coupon, divided by current price. Okay, so that's just one of those definitions you're expected to remember. If we want to set up the problem, we need to take this information and calculate yield to call and yield to maturity. The yield to maturity is calculated by mapping out the cash flows on the assumption that the bond pays as agreed, isn't called, and doesn't default. The yield to call, on the other hand, is calculated on the assumption the bond will call at the first possible opportunity. Okay, so last year Carson issued a 10-year bond. So this year it's got 9 years to go. It's got 9 more years to go. It has a $1,000 par value, and it has a 13% semi-annual coupon. So a 13% semi-annual coupon would be $130 a year, divided by 2, because you're going to get that in 2 installments of 65. So instead of 9 years to go, or it still has 9 years to go, but you get 2 payments per year. Okay. And it currently sells for $1,200. Okay, so that's the current price. So if I solve for rate here, what I'm going to get is the semi-annual rate. Well, that's okay. I can go through here and adjust that to an annual number. Number of periods. The payment would be $65 twice a year, so $130 total per year, but it's $65 every 6 months. The current price is $1,200. The future value is $1,000. And when I solve for the 6-month rate, that's 4.81%. All right, so the yield to maturity is an annualized number, so I've got to take that 4.81 and multiply by 2, and that gives me the yield to maturity on an annual basis. All right. The current yield would be 65 plus 65, $130 a year, divided by the current price of $1,200. So the current yield is 10.83%, and that makes the capital gains yield a negative number. Well, I already knew it was a negative number because the bond is selling at a premium. With a premium bond, if there was no other change in interest rates between now and maturity, that $1,200 today is going to drop to $1,000 at maturity. Okay? So that's my yield to maturity. Yield to call. It can be called in 6 years. So if I assume it's going to be called at a price of $1,065, that goes to $1,065. That's still $65 twice a year for the next 6 years. So there'd be 12 total payments. The price is the price. So people already know that it's callable, which means that they've already made an adjustment in the price for whether they think it's going to be called or not. Anytime you see the yield to maturity lower than the yield to call, you assume that the company will not call. Anytime that the yield to call is lower than the yield to maturity, the assumption is that it will be called. All right? You're still getting $65 per year, and it's still divided by 1,200. So what it's asking here is, what is the current yield? Is this yield affected by whether the bond is likely to be called or not? No. What is the expected capital gain or loss? The capital gains yield on the bond, if you're assuming it will be called, is actually higher. Okay? So does this capital gains yield depend on whether the bond's expected to be called? Yes. So the current yield, no. The capital gains yield, yes.